Good afternoon again.
Good afternoon.
Well, I've been doing this work probably for about 50 years, since I was in middle school, and my goal is to really lift up my ancestors. And what I want to share with you in the short term that I have with you today is I want to share 3 burial grounds that I've become familiar with, to just give you a sense for some things that are going right, perhaps some things that are not going so right, as you all ponder what you plan to do here. I think this is, how many people have been to Mount Vernon? Show of hands. So quite a few of you. Have you been to the burial grounds? Well, this is a map of the burial grounds of the enslaved. Well, actually, it shows the entire, Mount Vernon, the historic area there. And the lower left-hand corner of the map shows the enslaved burial ground. And over the course of the last several years, I've had an opportunity to work in that space. You can see here some of the background. Believe that there were, 317 enslaved men and women that were at the site at the time of when George Washington, passed away. Though people have been distributed amongst Martha Washington's children, and some were freed. But the cemetery itself is actually located, southwest of the mansion house. And take a quick look at that. There in 1929. The Mount Vernon Ladies Association put this marker on the burial ground, and it basically was an opportunity for them to recognize that in fact there were enslaved that were buried there, but they called them servants. They weren't enslaved. And over the course of time, this burial ground, kind of got lost. It got overgrown until at one point it was found. You can see that the marker was located in 1982, and people started saying, "What's going on here? There's something that's here that we ought to be looking at." Well, shortly after that, there was a lot of conversation about what they should do. They decided to, memorialize this area, and they worked with Howard University to do that. And many of you, I'm sure, have been down this walkway to see where the enslaved space is located at. And it really provides an opportunity for those a public that has been allowed to go to this place, which is intended to talk about George Washington in 1799, to recognize that there were other people in this space that provided the labor that allowed him to do the things that he did for our country. Those things get lost in the conversations that we have. The other thing that the Mount Vernon Ladies Association decided to do, along with some of the staff that they had there, was begin to think about doing an archaeological study of how many people are buried in this space. And it actually turns out that it was part of a thesis originally that was proposed here, that a person was doing a thesis and said this would be a great place to do this work. And that work started, and you can see in the second bullet there that there are actually 4 different studies that were done in this space. The project goals were to help tell about the American past, which includes the stories of all Americans. But yet there's very little that we can ascertain from these spaces except that they are laying in repose in this space. It basically said that there is potential to yield valuable information that will help us tell the story. And we've been talking about that a lot today, is how do we, my words, extract more information about the people who lived in this space. Well, I had an opportunity to volunteer on during a couple of different summers to actually work in this space. And I had the opportunity to put my hands in the ground and to use a trowel. The goals of this, they used ground penetrating radar first to identify a number of the spaces, the graves that were there. But the studies that I was a part of were intended to take about 6 inches of soil off of the ground so that they could identify where these spaces are, to kind of confirm what the GPR was telling them that was there. And so you can see all of those little brown spaces are places that are, in fact, enslaved graves. The red arrow shows the area that I worked in the 2 different summers that I was there. And we actually uncovered 3 different grave shafts that were there. I don't have any ancestors in that space. I'm getting choked up talking about it. But I was honored to be in that space. I was honored to touch the soil that they were laid to rest in. And although I felt connected to those that were resting there, I had a lot of feelings that rushed over me, but I also felt like I was invading space. And I think that's one of the things that you all will have to grapple with as you're thinking about, how do we memorialize this space? How do we investigate it so that we can better understand it? I think there are going to be people on a wide spectrum in terms of how we perceive these spaces and what we do with them. Some people will say, let's dig in and let's do more work and let's see what the bones tell us. And there are going to be others that say, let people rest. We know that they're there. Allow them to rest. They've done their work. Have they? Well, I think that's some of the questions that you all will need to grapple with as you think about this space. So if you could do it over again, I think it's important to kind of ask and that's one of the things that I think that you all should be asking yourselves, looking at what other people have done. Are there things that we could learn from having been in this space? And I think there are several. I think first of all is, why are you doing it? What are the things that you're hoping to get out of it? What are the benefits? And who are the winners and losers when you think about how the space is going to be used or looked into or moved or changed? How do you balance the differing perspectives from those who say we should do deep investigation to those that maybe do not feel that way? Who are the decision makers when you think about this space? Who decides? Matt was talking about the veto power that some people have as they're looking at what's going on in Montpelier. What will that look like in the space here? How invasive will the work be? Will it be 6 inches taken off the top? Will it be ground penetrating radar only? Will it be a multitude of things? And does the visual have relevance? Talking about looking at the forest and thinking about it that way. What does the visual look like? We as humans, sometimes we need that visual to understand that there are actually people that are laying there. But is that the most important thing? And down at the bottom, we've got to engage the descendant communities. So one of the things I've been involved with is actually helping to stand up a descendant community at Mount Vernon. And we have reached, in the last year or so, established ourselves as the League of Descendants of the Enslaved at Mount Vernon. And we are working to be kind of a voice to talk with the ladies, the Mount Vernon Ladies Association, to help balance that conversation. Up to now, that hasn't been the case. And so we're looking to try to gain ground in that space, if you will. So that was the first burial ground. The second one I want to talk about is the one at Arlington House, at Arlington National Cemetery. How many people have been to Arlington? How many people have been to Arlington House? Okay, so a fair amount of you. So I want to show this very quickly. There are several other slides I want to get to, but I show this to simply show how my Syphax family, which I'm very proud of, is connected to Martha Washington. You can see Martha was married to Daniel Parke Custis first, and then to George Washington, and she had a couple of kids, and she had a grandson named George Washington Parke Custis, who inherited a 1,100-acre plantation along with 2 other plantations, and he inherited people. He took people to Arlington to clear the landscape and build a mansion. He also had a child with an enslaved woman. Her name was Maria Carter Custis. Maria Carter Custis married Charles Syphax in the parlor of the mansion that was built in 1821. So that's interesting enough. But in 1831, George Washington Parke Custis' white daughter, Mary, married Robert E. Lee. And so that's, for me, being in this space, associated with the Lee history, is really pretty important and amazing to me. It allows me to kind of create yet another connection. But we have the Syphaxes and the Lees who are in this space. Ultimately, Maria gets married, and in 1826, George Washington Parke Custis sells her to a Quaker, and then gives her, she's freed at that point, and he gives her 17 acres of property. I show you this map. We were talking about the importance of maps. Incredibly important in terms of understanding the history here. But I want to put this up here so you can see the size of the plantation, where it is, and with regard to Washington, D.C. You can see the Pentagon there as it exists today. You can see Fort Myer Henderson Hall. And down there on the bottom left-hand corner is the 17 acres that Maria Syphax inherited from her father. I don't have a lot of time to go into all the details of the history of that, but there's a lot. If you want to ask me later, I'd love to talk about it. Because, many of you know that, thank you. I've got it. Many of you know that this is something I love to talk about. I could use a couple more tissues if we've got those.
There's a whole lot of story markets.
Okay, there we go. There we go. One more time. Thank you. Thank you. Good. Just do a little mop up here. Don't worry. Thank you. Okay, so let's go to the next thing here. So Maria passes away in 1886 or so, and she's buried on the property that was given to her by her father. The property was taken by the federal government. The 17 acres was taken by the federal government in about 1944. And when that occurred, they were doing that so that they could enlarge what we know today as Joint Base Myer Henderson Hall, where the Army basically guards the Tomb of the Unknown. That's where people are stationed. So she passes away along with Charles, who had passed away a few years before her, and they are basically exhumed and taken to a site outside of the state of Virginia, to Maryland, over to Suitland, Maryland, buried in Lincoln Cemetery. And so I bring this up today as my second example of what does it mean. We were talking about the Navy base. That was there was a burial ground on that space. Similar situation here, and what it really means to have value in property at one time and not value at another time, and then say, well, maybe we do really think that's important, and then to uplift this group. And Maria was the daughter of George Washington Parke Custis, who happens to be buried in Arlington National Cemetery. It just brings up opportunities and challenges as we think about how these spaces are used. A third one. So I want to talk for just a minute about Columbia and Harmony Cemetery. I don't know how many of you saw this, but in 2020, there was a Washington Post article about headstones being found in the Potomac River, not far from here. How many people remember that? Yeah, a lot of y'all, yeah. Well, so we talked about, the last talk, we talked about 22,000 people being buried in that cemetery. 37,000 people were buried in this cemetery over the course of 100 years. The property, once again, it was decided that it was more valuable. There was difficulty in maintaining the cemetery. It was purchased, and the person that purchased it wanted to develop it. And this is right in the heart of Washington, D.C. It's now under a metro stop. Those people that were buried there were intended to be moved to National Harmony Cemetery, and the headstones and the markers were basically sold for scrap. and they were dumped in the river to help protect the shoreline. And the state representative found these markers in 2016, saying, "Well, I think that's a headstone." Well, yeah. So I think this is kind of what it looks like. The space over here. On the left-hand side, that the orange marker shows where the 37,000 graves were. The one on the right shows the National Harmony Cemetery, where many of these people were put. They were supposed to be moved individually, but many of them were moved in mass, and they were put in large mass graves. Gotcha. Challenging. What does it mean to memorialize spaces like this? Our national capital scraped people off of the ground and threw them away. We can do much better than this. So where are they? I have a Syphax ancestor who actually was buried in that cemetery. We don't know where he's at, but that's one of the other things that I'm personally working on, is can we help to identify some of these 37,000 people so that we can honor them appropriately. So my last slide, I did it. How does the Stratford Hall community want to be remembered for your work? It's not just how you're going to do it, but how do you want to be remembered 10, 30, 50, 100 years from now in terms of how you have managed this space? I appreciate your time.